President Trump wrapping up his 4-day Middle East trip with a number of deals secured, including multi-billion-dollar investments in the U.S. by Saudi Arabia and the UAE. AI was the big focus, with Washington and Abu Dhabi entering a partnership to build the biggest data center outside of the U.S. Chipmakers also inking deals with Saudi's new AI company, Newman, allowing the Gulf nation to access the most advanced chips from NVIDIA and AMD. Joining us now with more, former Morocco Ambassador Mark Ginsburg, who served as ambassador under the Clinton administration and as White House Middle East advisor under the Carter administration. We also have Ben Steele, senior fellow and director of international economics for the Council on Foreign Relations. And of course, still with me, Victoria Fernandez, chief market strategist at Crossmark Global Investments. Thank you all for being here for the conversation. Ambassador Ginsburg, I want to start with you because I'm curious about what these deals signal for American companies going forward. I get the sense that the fact that so many CEOs were willing to follow the president to the Middle East and ink their own deals with the Middle East is a signal of maybe a framework the CEOs may want to follow moving forward if they want something from the administration. What do you think about that?
The rug bazaar was wide open. And the fact is that for purposes of looking at how many trillions or billions of deals were actually penned, we'll see what the bottom lines are. There's a lot of dollar signs that are being thrown around here. But the fact of the main remains is that President Trump is a great salesman. And in these three Arab states, the wealthiest of them all in the region, there's no doubt that there is an interest to more tightly tie these countries to American industry as well as to American security. And the investments that are being made by these countries are not just purely commercial. They're also intended to secure an American umbrella of security commitment to the region, which these Arab states are, shall we say, quite wary of, given Trump's administration and 1.0's reluctance to involve itself in the security of these countries, notwithstanding the Abraham Accords.
And Ben, come on into the conversation for us. What do you make of the way that these deals announced in the Middle East over the course of this week have potentially signaled a reordering of global superpowers and allyship, particularly given the closeness of the U.S. and the Middle East now versus the relationship that's ongoing with China?
Sure. Politically, this was quite a dramatic development. As you know, the Israelis are a bit discomfited by how close the Trump administration now appears to be to the Gulf states. From an economic perspective, this is a rather remarkable shift in policy. The Biden administration, as you know, was concerned to limit the expansion of AI infrastructure out of the United States abroad. President Trump, of course, had made it a centerpiece of his presidential campaign to reshore major manufacturing business and to prevent its going abroad. But now we're seeing the potential for massive AI infrastructure investments abroad that really adds a lot of uncertainty as to what the bottom line is in terms of U.S. trade and investment policy right now.
And my guest host, Victoria, has a question as well.
Yes, Ben, talking about the economic policy, looking at it through that lens, do you think that these deals that are being made or that have been made this past week allows this administration then to go harder on China again after this 90-day trial period is up?
That's a very good question because, of course, the Chinese have also been trying to embed themselves politically and economically more deeply in the Middle East and the Gulf region. I think, however, what we've learned over the last 6 weeks since Liberation Day is that Donald Trump is very sensitive to market moves. And I really don't think at this point he wants to be promoting any negative messages with regard to the relationship with China. As we saw with the recent framework deal that was announced, Treasury Secretary Bessent actually emphasized that the United States does not want to hurt China, does not want to decouple from China. This is a remarkable change in rhetoric from the presidential campaign when candidate Trump said that we were, quote unquote, going to tariff the hell out of China.
Victoria has another question for the ambassador as well.
Yes, Ambassador Ginsburg, I wonder when we look at the tariff policy as a whole and how it relates to countries in the Middle East, we're thinking that perhaps a 10% universal tariff might be where we end up. Do you think that that's something that the economies around the globe would be able to handle?
Well, it depends on each country. I mean, the problem here is that the president is making these decisions on the fly, so to speak. One day from the next, the tariff rate will be going up. If some country does something that the president doesn't like, next thing it'll go from 10% to 20%. I mean, the uncertainty is something that is not locked in here by any stretch of the imagination, from China to the Gulf states to Europe, et cetera. So he has created a world of uncertainty that is going to be directly affecting and impacting the American consumer. And in order to, in effect, harmonize this tariff structure is going to take, first of all, discipline from this White House, which it surely lacks. And secondly, a president that's not using tariffs as a cudgel to punish countries that don't agree with him on issues having absolutely nothing related to trade.
Right, Ambassador, we've got about 60 seconds left, but talk to me about the security risks of deepening these ties with the UAE.
Well, look, the United States already has deep ties with the UAE. We already have a 1, 2, 3 nuclear agreement. The Saudis would like the same. The president clearly has tied himself even more closely to the Crown Prince and to Saudi security interests. I'm all in favor of it. I mean, in terms of the Gulf states and ties to the U.S., these states are clearly a bulwark against the Iranian aggressive designs in the Middle East, and the Saudis and other than the Qataris. I'm no fan of the Qataris, but the Emiratis and the Saudis are essentially aligned with American foreign policy in the region.
President Trump's visit to the Middle East unleashing a wave of AI deal-making, the Trump administration clearing a path for Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates to pursue their artificial intelligence ambitions as deals with companies like NVIDIA offering Saudi Arabia and the UAE wider access to advanced AI chips, data centers, and AI infrastructure. What are the risks associated with those deals? Joining us for more, Mohammed Suleiman, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute. Mohammed, thank you for being here. So I guess there's a lot of fanfare around all of these deals. It's not just about AI. We just heard about a big deal for Boeing planes from Qatar. So how are you viewing this sort of wave of deal making that we're hearing about?
Great to be with you. Let me start by saying that the relationship between the United States and the Gulf has changed in the past 10 years. It started gradually in the mid-2010s when the Gulf countries started to diversify their economies away from oil. And they believe and they think that their future of their countries as a sovereign states, as economies that's wired for the 21st century is all about AI infrastructure. So the Gulf countries are going to see that sort of trend of those Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar, trying to become the back end for compute power that fuels the AI ecosystems globally. And this means that they have access to low cost energy, they have access to capital that they're able to invest in AI infrastructure. On top of all of that, they also secured partnerships with the United States when it comes to chips. So they have what I call the compute triangle: chips, data centers, and capital, and that what makes them a very powerful player in the AI ecosystem globally. And this is why you see a lot of excitement around the president's trip to the region, because it's more of a new era of relationship between the United States and the Gulf, wired around compute, not really crude.
And Mohammed, Tom Hayes is with me as a guest host for the hour, and he wants to ask you a question as well.
So Mohammed, what do you see as the magnitude of the amount of data centers relative to the rest of the world, and how are they cooling them? Is a key question in the Middle East moving forward. What do you see as the future? Is it going to be the data center hub of the world, or is it just going to be a major player alongside the U.S. and other nations?
Excellent question. I would say the United States and China, the Gulf is clearly emerging as this third theater of AI power. They are willing to invest heavily in AI infrastructure. And the question that you pose about cooling is extremely important. But I would say cooling today is not particularly about the question of access to water. It's about what cooling technologies that you have access to. We have seen a lot of new technologies, submersion cooling, directed chip cooling, that are reducing the cost broadly, the space needed for these sort of data centers. And I believe that the Gulf countries, through their energy companies, are investing in these sort of new chemicals for cooling, because this is an extremely important question for them. But to add on top of that, I think right now we're acting in an environment where energy is the real bottleneck for AI computing. I would argue that even ships with all the discussions around export controls and China able to access restricted AI ships from the United States, I don't believe that ships are the bottleneck. I think you through cash, R&D, huge market, I think it's very fair to say that you're going to have other countries able to have that sort of capability. But I think the question of energy, abundant energy to fuel the AI ecosystem, is the main decisive factor here. And this is where the Gulf is finding its own niche.
So if that's true, then effectively the two winners by default have to be the Middle East and the United States, because we have effectively unlimited access to energy, and natural gas being the derivative play to see that in the first stages. Is that a fair way to think about it?
I think it's a very fair way to think about that. I think the Gulf countries have been investing heavily in building the electricity grids around this sort of major hyperscale AI infrastructure. I agree with you. The United States is clearly ahead in the AI race. We have more than 60% of the global AI compute inside the United States. We have the abundant energy. And with the new discourse trying to streamline permits inside the United States to do major data center buildup, I think we are going to hopefully maintain our lead.
Yeah, and moving forward, that puts China at a relative disadvantage.
I wouldn't say that yet, for a couple of reasons. China is a huge market, and they were able to prove that they're able to innovate and even exceed expectations when it comes to their own innovation ecosystem. We have seen the Huawei release of AI chip, the Ascend AI chip, and that has been doing actually better than expected. So I wouldn't really discount China. I think China is a competitor in the AI race. I think they have the determination, they have the R&D spending, they're willing to go the extra mile, and I think you're going to see a lot of breakthrough inside the Chinese AI ecosystem.
Mohammed, to come back to my original question about sort of the risks here, are there any national security concerns about some of these deals, sending chips, sending other infrastructure to these Gulf Coast nations?
This is an excellent question. And we do have two camps when it comes to the question of ships. You have the camp that says we have to restrict ships exportation to any part of the world. We only have to we should export ships to very trusted allies, Five Eyes partners, even NATO, even not the entire NATO nations were part of what we call the AI diffusion rule that was released under President Biden. So this is a camp. There's another camp that's saying that, well, okay, sure, we're going to restrict sending these ships overseas, but that comes at a cost. That means we're going to undermine our American companies when it comes to own profits. These are the profits that NVIDIA uses for R&D. So you have to come with a balance. And I think the discourse we're seeing right now is how to come up with a government-to-government AI agreement with the countries that matter in the AI race, like the Gulf countries, when we have agreement on access, on security protocols, and by this, we're able to protect our own IP and our own ships. I think this is the way we're thinking about the question of ships and export control right now.
Mohammed, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Happy to be with you.
Let's get to some breaking news that was crossing the wire. A wave of deals being announced amid President Trump's visit to the Middle East. This time it's Boeing. President Trump saying Boeing has won its largest ever order in the company's history. Qatar Airways said to have purchased 160 aircraft from the U.S. company. Again, Trump saying that this is the largest Boeing order in its history. Of course, there's some other plane headlines that the president made with a Qatari plane, but we'll leave that aside for the moment as that country gives him a plane. Tom, Boeing is a company you own.
Yeah,
it's a company you like.
This is a big one, okay? We owned it around $150. It dropped down to $129 with all the tariff barriers and everything else. We bought it like the lights were going out. I mean, because here's the thing, we bet on jockeys. So they call me Turnaround Tom. I like to buy great businesses when they're temporarily marked down. Kelly Ortberg ran Rockwell Collins, okay? Defense contractor, 7 years, 4-bagger for owners. He's actually an engineer on the floor. So it's nice to have Boeing run by a guy who actually goes on the floor and knows how planes are put together versus a salesman when the doors fall off mid-flight. That doesn't work, okay? So Kelly is going to turn the business around. He's already done that. The stock is 129 4 weeks ago. It's 200 today. They just got a huge order. This is icing on the cake. This guy can deliver. They'll sell some of the space business and at the margins, but they operate in a duopoly. It's like it was hysterical when the Chinese said, "We're not going to take your planes during the tariffs." China needs Boeing's plane like a diabetic needs insulin, okay? I mean, they can go to Airbus, and Airbus will say, "We're so happy to have you as a new client. Your wait is 21 years. How many would you like?" And so now, as soon as this was done, China went back to Boeing and said, "Can we get back in line?" And Boeing said, "Yeah, we'll open the door. We like you as a customer." So China's back in the game. Saudi Arabia's back in the game. And they're going to build the planes better than they've ever built them because Kelly Ortberg actually understands the business.
Okay, well, I hope that's so for all of our sakes who fly on Boeings.
Before we go, take a quick check on chips as well, because that's been a lot of where the action has been as well today. It's names like NVIDIA, it's AMD, it's Qualcomm, of course, Saudi Arabia. President Trump was there, a lot of announcements, and a lot of excitement from investors.
Exactly. Yep. Here you got your semiconductor stocks. You can see NVIDIA, a huge pop there.
4% in NVIDIA. Well, we have just the man to talk to about chip stocks, including NVIDIA and AMD, moving back today on the back of AI deals between Saudi Arabia and U.S. technology firms. For more on the sector, I want to bring in now Patrick Moorehead, founder, CEO, and chief analyst at More Insights and Strategy. Patrick, it is great to see you as always, particularly today, Patrick, because you are the man to answer this question. I was just talking to Maddie, these moves we see in these chip names, Patrick, and of course we had President Trump in Saudi Arabia. We had this flurry of headlines, reports, AI-specific announcements, NVIDIA, AMD, Qualcomm. You did, Patrick, on X. You asked an interesting question, I thought, Patrick, off those announcements. You asked, listen, are these hard deals? Are these hard contracts? Or more like kind of, soft LOIs, letters of intent? What's your line of sight there, Patrick?
Yeah, so first of all, the only similarity between these AI deals is that they were with Humane and the KSA, right? But they were very different, right? AMD was all about a joint venture with a $10 billion price tag, but no details on who's funding what, where would the AMD capitalization come from? So, and it's, when the details aren't there, you have to assess that this thing is early in. And then with NVIDIA, it was really straightforward, right? They're selling GPUs with a price tag estimated at around $7 billion, but still no firm commitment, no firm order around that. But with that said, it's very exciting because I don't think investors were factoring any of this into their theses going into this.
Patrick, one question for chip investors, of course, has been whether we kind of hit this peak in CapEx, right? And my question to you is, was that question in any way answered by what we just saw in Saudi Arabia? And here's how Bernstein, Stacy Rasgon, Stacy, here's what he wrote his clients. He said, for investors worried about AI CapEx sustainability, we now have another deep-pocketed customer willing and capable to spend large amounts of money on a clearly strategic push as Saudi Arabia attempts to position itself as a regional and global AI hub. Your response to that, Patrick?
I agree with Stacy, and I view this as incremental upside, right? This wasn't factored into my calculations in terms of this CapEx. It was typically, we just look at the Mag 7 and what they committed to. This was very much not in the Mag 7 capital expenditure updates, and it's an upside. One interesting thing, though, about this is that we're researching right now is this potentially going to take away any business out of Western Europe that has put up nearly every blockade to drive innovation, AI. And it's not that protecting people's information is important. It is, but when they find themselves drastically behind other parts of the world, this could be a move for the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar to take market share away from Western Europe.
And Patrick, I love that you bring up the global perspective. This is something I was speaking with Gil Luria about earlier today in regards to China's role in this dynamic here. We were talking about the fact that Bank of America does say that the Saudi deal will offset any restrictions that put a curb on China's ability to increase purchases of chips. But that doesn't seem to be consensus. Gil was telling me there's a concern that more severe China restrictions are still a risk for NVIDIA. So where do you net out on that?
So when it comes to China, right, you have a lot of different camps inside of DC, which is why it looks like there's mixed messages. On one day, you'll have President Trump saying one thing, and then you'll have somebody in the cabinet saying something slightly different, and then you'll have a senator who might be a China hawk really lean in. So there's a lot of discussion going on there. I think, though, that the AI diffusion law, as it relates to the Middle East and Saudi Arabia and Qatar in specific, that will disincent those regions from buying Chinese semiconductors, which I think is a net positive, but also the restrictions that we were going to put on countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar are no longer the case.
So Patrick, put a bow on this for me for NVIDIA investors. Is this rally just the beginning, or is this a temporary bounce?
This is likely a temporary bounce, but it's a consistent bounce because it will likely lead to a net revenue and profit upside for NVIDIA. I still think China is the number one element and region to figure out for some sort of a big rally with NVIDIA, but we've seen some early softening in the tones that the administration has put out there. And I do believe that if Trump administration can craft a real deal, right? Because what we saw earlier was a framework for a deal and pulling back to what one of your guests said, which still is the highest tariffs we've ever seen, then we could see even more restrictions being pulled back on China.
Patrick, I want to end here by drilling down into another name you know very well, which is AMD, making news in Saudi Arabia as well. Strong earnings report. They now announced this share buyback. Just talk to me, Patrick, about how you see AMD's role in the broader competitive landscape now and looking ahead.
Right. So they're on a roll. I mean, they have record CPU market share at around 40%. That still means that ARM and Intel have the other 60%, but they're doing very, very well. And I think what investors were looking for was an extra vote of confidence related to their data center GPUs. I did think that they got this with the Saudi Arabia deal, the $10 billion joint venture. But holistically, what they do want to see is they do want to see some more specific numbers from them and a roadmap. I think we are going to get more details on that in a month at AMD's event in San Francisco. Final comment on the buybacks, the $6 billion buybacks that enables up to $10 billion in total is a vote of confidence from the board of directors that they believe that the company is undervalued. A very good sign.
All right, Patrick, we got to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, appreciate your insights.
Thanks, Maddie, Josh.
President Trump's 4-day trip to the Middle East kicking off in Saudi Arabia with one big message. If you invest in the U.S., you'll find Washington at your door. Here with more on the president's trip to Saudi Arabia, we've got Yahoo Finance senior columnist Rick Newman. Rick, what have you been tracking? What do we know so far about the political implications and what President Trump is looking for here?
This is not your normal presidential overseas trip. It's not really about diplomacy. Trump is not going to be doing too much, apparently, trying to get a peace deal in Israel, for example. He's going over there, I mean, to make deals. That's what he says he wants to do. So he's going to hit 3 countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. And those are all countries that are trying to diversify away from oil. They've obviously got tons of money. They have sovereign wealth funds, and they're looking to invest. So this is all about artificial intelligence, selling them technology they need to build data centers, develop artificial intelligence and things like that. So that list of CEOs includes mostly tech people and defense people. So that's going to be the focus here, selling U.S. High-end technology chips and other things relating to data centers and, as usual, weapons to these countries that have a lot of money to spend.
Yeah, Rick, talk to me about that. There's the level of CEOs, especially from those big tech companies that are in the room. We've already got this news of that AI chips deal, getting a little bit easier access to those chips from Saudi Arabia. Any information about any other potential deals that we could see by end of day today?
Who knows? And, the thing with all these deals that Trump announces, I mean, in many cases, these are deals that have already been announced and they've sort of been repackaged. So you have to look out for that. Also, I mean, obviously, CEOs, all these CEOs want to be in the room. I mean, this is different from Trump's first presidential term. A lot of these CEOs were at odds with Trump during his first term, and we've seen many of them just making peace with Trump, whatever it takes. I mean, think about the tech CEOs who paid $1 million for his inauguration parade and showed up at the stand when he was sworn in. So these business leaders have decided it's better to be inside Trump's orbit than outside, and maybe they're going to get a payday today.